Hi
everyone, and welcome to another conversation. My name is Bianca, and I'm joined by Debbie. We are the co-founders and co-chairs of Thrive Parent Support and Advocacy Group here in South Africa. We support families who have children who are deaf or hard of hearing. Debbie and myself, we both have children who are deaf, and we just started this series of conversations to share some of our experiences, knowledge, and insights that we've gained on our journey thus far. Today's conversation follows on from our previous conversation where we looked at a really critical topic of connection. So do go back and have a look at that conversation. And today we're hoping to focus mostly on some of the strategies in terms of trying to nurture a connection and an awesome relationship with our kids to boost their emotional and their mental well-being. So as we start, I wonder if you could just summarize some of the key points from last time, Debbie, so that we can then strategize. What can we practically do as parents?
Thanks, Bianca. Hi, everyone. So we had a beautiful conversation a week ago about the key things around well-being, specifically related to a deaf or hard of hearing child. We spoke, a lot about deaf anxiety and really what that is. It's the uncertainty that a deaf person faces every single day. And it's got to do with the fact that the world in which we all live in is designed for hearing people, not for deaf people. And so a deaf person, a child or an adult, is constantly having to find ways of adapting themselves. How are they going to fit into every single situation? And they carry that burden on their own because the world does not adapt for them. So they have to adapt themselves. And really, that's the opposite of the concept of belonging. And this concept of belonging, connection, relationships is really what we're talking about, because it's such a key to living wholeheartedly and living a life of joy and happiness and physical health. And I think so many of our deaf children experience loneliness, which is, it's deeply excruciating for us as human beings to experience that. And a deaf child or an adult is so much more likely to experience that. So certainly this aspect of how do we now support our kids as parents of deaf or hard of hearing children to develop this connection, because really it's the key to living a joyful life. And then secondly, I think we also spoke a lot about the concept of self-worth last week, and really it's been shown that it's the belief of our own worthiness that is the key to living a wholehearted life. So today, I think we're going to speak a lot about the strategies, and a lot of these I realize are just so simple, and a lot of them we know, but we don't always think about, but highlighting the things we can do in the home, the strategies and the tools that we can use to enable our children to develop beautiful and meaningful relationships with ourselves and others, and also to develop the mindset of belief in themselves around their own worth.
Awesome. So I think for me, one of the core starting blocks when it comes to connection is communication. And I think that's often the crux of a lot of the difficulty that we as parents face with raising a deaf child, is just overcoming the very real barrier of initial communication. Because until, for those children that use amplification, sound access is optimized, that's difficult for everyone. And for children whose families choose to use sign language, there's a process of learning an entire language before one feels like you can communicate. So maybe we could just brainstorm some of the basic strategies with communication and how to build on these to get a more fluent, meaningful communication as the ultimate goal.
Yeah. Can I just start this conversation, because communication and connection are so interlinked, aren't they? And I guess what I want to just start by saying is that you and I have said this a lot. Having a deaf child actually forces us to be a lot more purposeful about our communication with our child. So it might be, you know, the simplest thing that's, I know with my deaf daughter, I know that I can't just, oh, okay, we're going now, and walk out the door. And we've also spoken about this incidental hearing, but you know, with her, I'm given this opportunity to be so much more purposeful, getting down to her level, looking at her in the eyes, using all my facial expressions, my body, and a lot more of my heart actually in that communication. And you know, I think even just the way you look at a child communicates so much. And I would encourage all of you to try with your deaf and your hard of hearing children, just to look at your child with a sense of, you don't have to use any words for this, but with a deep sense of that child is so worthy of the greatest joy in life, that child is treasured and that child is cherished and so deeply loved, that you can say with no words whatsoever, that you can say with just a look. And that speaks without words volumes to your child. And I would say, as a first tip, as you begin to start communicating with your child, and especially if you're frustrated with, you know, not having a common language to use together, use the language of the heart. And that is really, it's love is felt. It's not always spoken. And in fact, so much more than, you know, shouting to your kids as they run out the door or as you run out the door, I love you. Get to their level and tell them I love you with your heart and your energy, and that will be felt in their deepest core. And that's just, yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, before we actually talk about actually, you know, any language, and, you know, any spoken or signed language as such. I think it's a beautiful thing. And if you've got hearing only children and you listen to this, try it with them. It's amazing.
I think you're completely right. I mean, I'm just imagining and thinking about times where I've been overseas in environments where I have no shared language with the people around me, and picturing, say for argument's sake, a French person and being able to communicate with them quite well. In fact, I remember once having a full conversation with someone on an airplane who was only speaking French and I was only using English, but through our body and through drawing little pictures and through just the way that we conducted ourselves, we were able to communicate some basic stories and certainly able to communicate a feeling of mutual respect and interest. And so I think you're completely right in saying that even without a common language at all, before we even go there, there's so much that we can communicate to our kids that give them that feeling of a stamp of approval. And then I think the second step in terms of communication is understanding that it's going to be a faithful daily improvement. It's not something that any of us are going to be able to just click our fingers and have there, because it's both sides, both us learning skills irrespective of the modality our kids use, and it's about them learning skills too. And different children will also have different challenges, different abilities, different preferences towards different modalities, etc. It depends on the kid. But realizing that this is not going to happen overnight, and it is a matter of faithful steps in that direction of ultimately wanting to be able to communicate with them. I think we are also talking, we will use terminology like modality, and here we kind of referring to a bit of a binary, oralism or sign language. The reality is it can be a combination, and it can include a lot of other modalities, which include things like picture boards, various AAC devices. Communication is really quite limitless. So when we are using the term communication, or when we are referring to an example, please just know that it's pretty much achievable throughout any modality, depending on what ultimately suits your child. And I think part of this is, part of connecting is a shared responsibility, is believing that this is not all about what suits me. If it suits me to connect with my kid in English, that's great, and that might be where I start. But it's not all about me. It's about the other side of the connection, what suits them, and bringing those two worlds together, realizing that ultimately both are going to be making compromises. And that's the beauty of any relationship, is that it's from both sides. So I think just with our kids, it's going to be about facilitating our learning and facilitating their learning.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the topics that we want to cover in future is some specific tools and tips for those parents whose children might not have amplification or are not going to be using oral language, and what are some skills to pick up sign language, because I think most of us parents are hearing, and some of our kids are not going to be oral. So what are some fantastic tools to specifically pick up sign language? I think that's a great topic that we'll separately discuss. I just wanted to mention here one thing, because this is one of my favorites in terms of a practical tip at home, and that is, and I've always just known this intuitively, eating dinner together. So this is just such an amazing opportunity to enrich your communication and your connection with your kids. So there's been a lot of evidence and a lot of studies done on the concept of families eating dinner together around, it might not even be around a table, but just in a sense of community eating together. And that just really deepens your sense of connection with your child. And it also has really shown to have fantastic benefits in terms of children's academic performance. Children who eat dinner regularly with their families are less likely to delve into drugs and alcohol. So many fantastic benefits. And actually, if your child is still developing their language, there was a study done at the Harvard Graduate School, and they wanted to see what environments do children learn best in. And I mean, what they took is they took 2,000 words, which they knew were fabulous markers of good literacy in children. And so what environment do you think kids would be most likely to learn those words? And I mean, I would have said certainly it's reading to children, because that's, always been my go-to, read. And in fact, they found that only 143 of the words were picked up and learned by children through reading to them. Yet 1,000 of those 2,000 words were learnt where? At the dinner table. So even if it's just certain sounds that you've decided to learn, dinner table conversational sounds that you reinforce at the dinner table, or whether it's oral language you're developing with your child, that's it. Or maybe you're a parent whose child knows sign language and you are still trying to learn sign language. The dinner table is just a fantastic opportunity and a fantastic time for you to learn from them. I think so many of us parents are so busy, so to be intentional about acquiring a new language can feel so overwhelming and stressful, but this just provides one opportunity every single day, if you're meeting at the table once a day, for that just fantastic connection. Also modeling. If you are struggling to communicate with your child, it is the opportunity to model, because we all know that children don't learn from us by what we tell them to do or not to do. They learn from us by what they see us doing and not doing. So it's a fantastic time maybe to teach your kids about taking turns to talk at the table, taking turns with the, dishing up the different meals or whatever it is, modeling maybe, how to resolve conflict, how to take turn in conversation. So just a great opportunity to develop all skills to do with language. And then also just to say that it's a fantastic opportunity if you're a family that likes to say grace together, and so as a family expressing gratitude together is another factor, a gem in terms of building happiness and wholeheartedness in all of us as human beings. Expressing gratitude is one of those, certainly at the top of the list. So it's just so many little opportunities having meals together to build the connection, build the language, build the communication. And that's, I would, if you start nowhere else, just start with having family meals together. Yeah.
And that's what I love about this journey, is that it highlights things that are actually beneficial to everyone. Having dinner at the table is beneficial to every family, irrespective of whether they are deaf or hard of hearing. And I also, just one thought is that for some families, this might not be a practical thing that they can do, but something I learned was that a round table, for example, was more facilitating of a conversation for someone who's deaf, because there aren't any corners that you have to kind of look around, that you can see everybody at one glance. And so we went and changed our table to have a round table for that specific purpose. And I'd say that I definitely can see the benefit of that. One thing we also at a family decided to do is not to have a television. So aside from the fact that that causes some background noise, which is because often it's left on. I grew up in a home that always had the TV on. It does create this distracting noise and definitely interfere with conversations. It was not an excuse to rush our dinner table opportunities to have conversations. And it also meant that we could have time to be more intentional over other things. So aside from the dinner table, which I'll come back to in a second, just on some of the other things that we do around our own dinner table, is we've been quite purposeful in playing physical games together at the coffee table or at the table. And when I mean board games, other games, because that's also an awesome opportunity for connection. And certainly there are games that a deaf child who's more visual will be absolutely amazing at, and just a time to celebrate their differences and their gifts and their strengths. Also, some of those games are very visual and don't need lots of intricate discussions, etc. So just looking for opportunities at the home for ending time. And I think that's one of the core things, is if you don't have time, you're not going to be able to do any of these things. And to prioritize and say, look, either I need to speak to my boss and get home an hour earlier, or I need to carve out some time of the weekend, or we need to wake up an hour early, or just do something that enables that time to be spent together in whatever way. But something that we also do at the dinner table, not as often as maybe we should, and maybe this is a good reminder to me to just put more effort into such a thing, but is we have this time of affirming each other. So we'll go around the table and we'll say one thing that made us proud of that person today, or one thing that we celebrate about that person, or one of the things we love about that person, and everybody has to say it for each person. And I think it's just really awesome to have those little people being validated by each other. They leave that table knowing that they have a team who are for them. And that's always something they can go back to, whether they at school or something happens and it's not that great. They know in the depths of their soul that they have a team who is for them. And gratitude is awesome. So sometimes, I think that is honestly a key to enjoying this life, and very much so the life of parenting a deaf or hard of hearing child, where you will have seasons where things just feel like barrier after barrier after barrier, and you start forgetting what you're grateful for. And practicing that gratitude is really, really important. And we'll have times where we just speak gratitude at our table, and we'll say, I'm grateful for her because she does A, B, and C, or she brings so much joy into our lives. And again, that gratitude being founded at who they are rather than any achievement they might have made is also just an awesome strategy for any family, because I think even for typical families, high achievers, etc., some of the internal beliefs that one starts to take in are things that I have to do something for approval, instead of I just got to be me. And I think that's something that again is such a gift to this journey of just really just pushing aside the clutter and saying who you are is worthy of my time to connect with you, of my time to give you eye contact, of my time to validate you. And honestly, I think you hit the nail on the head in that most of that can happen at the dinner table. And if you're from a culture where dinner tables aren't really what happens, we all eat together. Eating is communal for every culture. And so that can be done in every way. And if you're from a family that's larger than just the nuclear family, to bring attention and share knowledge and information with other people, whether it's a much bigger community that eats together, just so that they understand that this child needs to be included too, and it's never an inconvenience. So I think that's also really important, is for that single deaf child in a big community, for them to never believe that they're an inconvenience to anybody, but they are worthy of having something repeated. They are worthy of having some of the conversations slowed down
Absolutely. In fact, I spoke once about, the value of having dinner together as a family. And I was approached afterwards by somebody who grew up hard of hearing. And she said to me, actually, I used to hate having dinner with my family because I felt completely excluded. So I think this is something that's really important to note here. If you have one member of the family who is deaf or hard of hearing, that needs to be honored, and that person needs to be consciously included in whatever happens at the dinner table. And my deaf daughter will very often, while we're having dinner, she can't always keep up with, because she is oral, but she can't always keep up with the oral conversation. She will very often stop and say, "What did you say? What's going on?" And you never say, or "Don't worry about it," or "I'll tell you later." That's very dishonoring to a deaf person. "I'll tell you later," "Oh, it doesn't matter." That person, the deaf person at the dinner table, needs to be kept in the loop of the conversation so that they feel important at the dinner table, and they don't feel like, that's not an experience of exclusion for them. It must be an experience of inclusion for them. And Bianca, I also just wanted to pick up on your fantastic point about the TV. I would say if there are two things you could do, it would be getting rid of your TV and having dinner with your family, and making sure that the deaf person is included. One of the things I did want to talk to today is this concept of presence. So I know that I work from home, so I'm around my children a lot, but certainly I know there are days where my presence is absent. I'm not available. I'm present, but I'm not available. And TV does that, doesn't it? Any device does that. And certainly none of us are perfect in there. I have my days where the children have to say to me, "Mom, stop looking at your phone." So having that sense of presence, it's exactly what you said. You are important enough for me to put down my laptop, turn off the television, put down my phone, and to actually focus my energy on you, because you are that important to me. That does wonders in terms of building self-worth. It straight away sends a message to a child: I am worthy, I'm enough, I don't have to do anything but be myself, and my parent wants to engage with me. The absence of presence is certainly something that we're all guilty of at some point, but we really need to be aware of that, especially with a deaf or hard of hearing child in the family. So as much as you can, turn off the TV or get rid of it completely if you're able to. Yeah, I love that point. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking also of times where we've focused on connection and the child feeling heard, and that is how we speak about them in front of others. And so, I've had times just, being shopping, looking for clothing or whatever it might be with my child, and that person talking directly to me when actually they should be engaging with the child. And if the child looks like too much hard work to engage with, that often doesn't happen. And you as the parent have that opportunity to redirect that conversation so that your child is feeling seen by others, but because you think they're worthy enough. And all of that is subtle and subconscious, but it really does matter. I think for, especially, I think every child can pick up on these cues, but especially those that have access to sound, you'll be in conversations where people will say things like, "What's wrong with your child? Why do they have that on their head?" referring to a cochlear implant or something like that. Man, watch yourself in those moments. Those are the moments you often feel caught off guard, and you just want to fob it under the table and say, "Oh, nothing," or "Oh, they're deaf," or whatever. Those are the moments to shine in front of your child, because they are waiting and they want mom to say, "There's nothing wrong with my child. She's amazing. Oh, you mean those hearing aids? She happens to be deaf. This is how we can say hello to her." Or you like to ask her they are, because she can explain it back to you, or whatever it might be. But just modeling that positivity that you feel toward your child to others, because as opportunities come, and it's the easiest time to drop that ball, and it's the time when your kids watching how you see them when other people are looking. It's all very well when you're one-on-one, but if mom's the face doesn't sort of frown when people ask about me and my hearing loss, but actually it lights up and she looks excited, this must mean that I'm good enough. And so I'll just encourage you to look for those opportunities and start even practicing even with your own extended families. Stop people when they say things that are demeaning about your child. They don't necessarily mean it, but sometimes they come out, and just model that positivity. I think that's one way of having your child feel connected to you.
Wonderful. I love that. Yeah. I think also something else that comes to mind for me is, there are various ways that we can help to move our children away from loneliness, if that's what they're feeling. And certainly one is the relationship with us or with a caregiver. Research also shows that having multiple very secure, strong attachments are very beneficial for children. So even it's what's called relational connectedness. So create opportunities with friends or your extended family where you can have good times and your deaf child is included. That's a relational connectedness. It's not a one-to-one relationship, but it's certainly a way of children feeling included. And it might mean you advocating for your child. It might mean you explaining to your extended family or your friends that actually, when we do this, we need to do it this way, because that's that's how, my child's going to be able to access this activity. Even if it just means, going to the beach and swimming in the sea, and having fun and allowing your child to experience the sort of relational opportunity of having fun with other people. And then certainly another thing, it's called collective connectedness. And that is, it's when you find something that you and your child both enjoy that you can engage with together. And a great thing that comes to mind is volunteering for something. So volunteering to help in a cause or whatever it is, something that's meaningful to both you and your child, them giving back to society in a collective way, doing something with others that is important to all of you, really builds a strong sense of inclusion and connectedness. And also, interesting to note, it's shown that giving back to society is one of the strongest builders of self-esteem in a child. So I think that's also, something great. If you can volunteer to do something together to contribute to society, that's a fantastic way of making your child feel connected with humanity. Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. Also, just simply spending time with them, playing some sport. That's awesome. I mean, you don't necessarily even need language for that. Just spending time and showing that they are worthy of your attention. I think you've touched on something really important, and that's the nurturing of relationships outside of your own nuclear family. And that takes some effort at times, but it's worth it. So what you said, for example, a culturally relevant example to my family was at young children's games, when they were still very young, they'd do things like that included music, like pass the parcel, and then when the music stops, you open the parcel, or musical chairs or whatever. And I remember one family we were anticipating that game with, and we asked them if it would be possible to include a flashing light, so either torch flashing on and off or something like that with the music, and so that there was a visual cue for that end of the music as well. And it was just so overjoying to see my child included in that activity, just like everybody else. And I also just think to create your own awareness of how to include others. If you're expecting others to include your kid, it's just only right to be changing your lens of inclusion for other children that might be different to your kid too. I definitely think discussing these things with your family, being able to strategize, involving other siblings, having them be part of the problem-solving team is just really awesome in terms of general buy-in. And just create opportunities for your children to have friends. And importantly, and this is one of the benefits of Thrive, is we have opportunities for parents to meet other families who also have children like them. And that is really humbling to me as a mom, to think that is something that's quite easily overlooked, but also just really grounding for the child to meet young children like them, the same age, in other words, through opportunities where you get to engage, and those might require you taking that step out and being purposeful in that space. But then also young adults, and we mentioned this in the last conversation, or just inspiring role models for your child to either be able to physically engage with other people like them who are adults, or otherwise look them up on the internet and together follow somebody who's got a cool story, who's got a social media presence, who's also deaf or hard of hearing, that you can show your child your admiration for, and how they can relate it back to themselves as having that approval and that love from mom or dad and the family. Challenge your communities that you're part of, whether it's church or anything like that, to be inclusive, for your child to engage with connections at that level. Challenge them. Don't ever take no for an answer, ever. And but model kindness while you do that. It's not a space to make demands and to start shouting and declaring right, but rather a space for developing relationships and having this teachability, that you're able to invite other people onto your journey. You as a mom who knew nothing, who now knows something, can now teach others who also know nothing but want to learn something.
Absolutely. You know what I love? Yeah. What I love, what you're saying there is you're talking about advocating for your child and doing that in your community. And you're talking about modeling that for your child. And I think, we need to all be actively teaching our deaf or hard of hearing children how to advocate for themselves. And I think we should do a whole session like this just on how to advocate for your child. I think that would be a lovely topic. But you're modeling it. So you're modeling that for your child and thereby teaching them how to do that, because they're going to need those skills as they get older and older, and they're not with you all the time as they enter school, high school, and the working world. They're going to need to have to advocate for themselves. And so by you modeling that, and you're also then modeling it for the rest of the community, you're modeling to them how they can advocate for not just your child, but any child who has additional needs, so that child, the burden, as we say, is not sitting on the child to adapt themselves. The entire community, I love this, the entire community takes on the role of advocating for those who have different needs to the typical or the normal. And that's really what we want to create in society, that everyone is aware of it. And I just also wanted to mention here, as we're talking, I think what is very important in the space of deaf anxiety is to talk to our kids about it, to teach them about deaf anxiety and some experiences that they might have as they go out into the world, especially as they start to sort of get older and separate from you. Talk to them about that. And certainly when they do have feelings, the stress, the frustration, the uncertainty, the sadness, the exclusion, validate their feelings. And I think that's another thing, teaching children how to be present with their feelings is another incredible topic, and when we do the topic of emotional intelligence, we'll talk more about that. But certainly, so on one hand, making them very aware of deaf anxiety, validating their feelings when they do have those feelings, but on the flip side, making them very aware of deaf gain. So, what are the fabulous things about being deaf? I know Sarah, my daughter, always says, if she's reading a book and there's irritating noise going on in the house, hey, I just get to turn my hearing aids off and everything's cool. She loves the fact that she can turn off her ears when she chooses to. She can have silence whenever she chooses to. I was just watching her at the beach on the weekend, and obviously doesn't wear her hearing aids when she's at the beach, and I'm just watching her spending sort of 3 hours just in the sea and on the sand, in this silence with all the visual cues, and I just thought, wow, what a beautiful experience that must be for her. I think I would love that experience. Such a wonderful experience. So there's so much to gain from being deaf. And I don't know if you want to add in anything here, Bianca, but certainly that's another topic we need to cover with our children, making them aware of the great positives about being deaf. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree completely. I think just in terms of focusing on connection, what you mentioned, which as we said, we'll delve into in another conversation about emotional intelligence, is connection doesn't always mean happiness. Connection means, as you've mentioned before, presence. So meeting a child where they're at when they've had a day of rejection is connection, rather than trying to make them feel better. Don't worry, by all means make them a cup of tea, give them a biscuit, give them a big hug, but don't try and move their emotion to disregard the negative. And I think that's such a core part of connection that we often don't get right, only because we're trying to make life better for them. And that becomes very much part of our identity as parents. We do so much to make things better for them. What we must try and avoid doing is rush making the emotional space better, but rather enable them to hold that space, survive that space, and grow in a resilient way, because it's in that time that they'll feel that connection, that mom gets me, dad gets me, granny gets me. They're not trying to make me happy. They desire to understand where I'm at and what I'm experiencing.
That's possibly the most powerful thing of this entire conversation, what you've just said there. I think that's just, with any child, whether they're hearing or not, that as parents is one of the most powerful things we can do, and certainly it's linked to lifetime success. Yeah, so let's really delve into that as well. I love it. Yeah. I've got something.
Yes.
You go.
No, carry on.
Well, I was just
going
to. There was another thing that I as you start getting into this whole space, it just, it feels like we could go on forever, and we're probably already running out of time. But yeah, we are running out of time. But it's almost like we need part 3. Something that I just think it's so worthy of mentioning here is supporting our children in developing the mindset of making mistakes, and having that being completely acceptable. And I just want to, there's an amazing book I read, it's called Black Box Thinking, by Matthew Syed, and he talks about, the core example he uses in this book is, he talks about the aviation industry, and it has become over time one of the safest industries in the entire world. And why is that? Because all commercial planes are fitted with this almost indestructible black box. And that black box is continually analyzing data from all the processes, all the technical stuff, everything that's happening of importance in that plane is collected as data in this black box. It is only used when something goes wrong, when there is some sort of a mishap, whether it be a minor thing or a major thing. That black box is then opened, and it's not actually a black box. I think it's a bright, luminous orange box, but they call it a black box. The data is taken and it's analyzed so that they can make corrective action. They can take corrective action, should I say. And the aviation industry has become one of the safest in the world because of that process. It's the sort of failure, the allowance of failure, the being outspoken about failure, the being open to failure so that we can learn and get better. And that for me is something so critical for our children's self-worth, to have hold the space for them to be wrong, to be imperfect, to make mistakes, to get it wrong, to say the wrong thing, to be insensitive, to fail in tests, to take a wrong course. It is so important. In fact, it's crucial to the development of a child and the development of their self-worth. So just to mention, be in that space of almost encouraging the making of mistakes, provided that the mistakes aren't made over and over again, provided that they're spoken about and not looked at as something wrong or criticized, looked at and, wow, so you made a mistake, where do we go from here? And what could we do different next time? I just think it's really worthy of mentioning that now. And again, it feels like we could have a whole session just on that topic, but yeah, have the space in your home where your children and you as adults, I mean, I'm getting it wrong daily and I probably will for the rest of my life, but don't make that wrong in your home. I think that what I would say.
That's good. And I think that the relationship to mental health is largely that we're in such an achievement driven society that we just want to look good all the time. And again, this is where this journey is an absolute gift, is that that got totally smashed out of the water when we had a deaf child and we came back to reality of meeting the small gains as a means to the bigger ones, and being able to treasure each one of those and be able to celebrate each and every one of those. And there's going to be so many opportunities on this journey to have a good laugh, and a good laugh at yourself. If you're a family that learns some sign language, you're going to be corrected by your kids because you're going to do things wrong. Just celebrate that opportunity to show them that mistakes are real, that we all make mistakes, that we all learn step by step, that we all unlearn things and relearn things. And just, I would say, don't despise that part of the journey, but rather just embrace it as one of the gifts that this journey does bring. But thank you so much, Debbie, for again just conversation, because I think certainly if I think of one of the main goals of this journey is really that my kids always feel connected to me and our family, and that our relationship is always one that makes us feel really fondly of each other and feel excited to get together when they're adults and they've left home. And it's just sort of the treasure in our hearts, and it's worth fighting for. It's worth pursuing. It's worth getting over our own insecurities, our own disbeliefs about ourselves, and just keeping our eye on that goal. So, above all else, above any achievements, above any degrees, above any of those things that the world values as important and worthy, may we strive for connection.
Absolutely.
So thank you, everyone.
Wonderful.
And please join us again for the next conversation. Take care.
Bye.